To get us started today with a short primer of the history of our economy and why and how we need to build a new economy to better serve people and planet, I'd like to introduce Deric Gruen. Deric works at the intersection of equity, environment, and community and economic development. He is the co-director at Front and Centered, where, in collaboration with the People's Economy Lab and other partners, he developed the New Economy Washington project. He co-developed Rethinking Prosperity at the University of Washington Center for Communication and Civic Engagement to advance promising economic ideas and practices that work for more people within the planetary boundaries. He's also served as a founding sustainability director at Bellevue College, was a fellow at the Sightline Institute, worked at the Trade Development Alliance, and has consulted on numerous local and international projects. He is on the board of Sustainable Consumption Research and Action Initiative and contributes to work groups of the New Economy Coalition. And his breadth and depth of understanding of this issue is amazing, and we're lucky to have him here in our community. So thanks, Deric, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with everyone today. So Front and Centered, if you're not familiar, is a statewide coalition of groups and organizations that are rooted in communities of color and built front and centered really to be a place of collective action on climate and environmental justice. And I want to acknowledge and give thanks to SVP partners who were really important to the early formation of Front and Centered and helped stick with us and help build the coalition to what it is today. So we're grateful for that early support. So we're going to talk today about the economy. And I'm going to start with, the New Economy Washington is not an organization. It's more of a set of ideas, a framework, an idea that we hope others can build upon, that we need to make change in our economy, that we know that we won't achieve, all the things we're pursuing in terms of racial justice, in terms of health, in terms of the environment, unless we make some really pretty fundamental changes to the way the economy works. We can't keep mitigating harm on an operating system that's fundamentally flawed. So Front and Center was a partner in this work and thinking about it because communities of color and communities on the front lines of racial and economic environmental justice know really better than anyone the extent of those flaws and have the experience and ideas to build an economy that's more regenerative by design. So to start this conversation, I would love if everyone would actually take a moment and you can chat this if you'd like to share with others or just write it down to think about, what is your understanding of the economy? What is the economy is the first, and then what is the economy for? And I'm just going to take, 20 seconds here for you to kind of think about what that is for you. What is the economy and what is the economy for? You don't need to overthink it, just the first thing that popped into your head. And and feel free to chat if you'd like, but Shio, you can go to the next slide. Here are some ideas from a piece of work that was reported in the UK actually by a group called the New Economy Organizing Network. They did a qualitative and quantitative research study around framing the economy. And they found kind of four major areas of people's, consideration of what the economy is and how it works. For many, the economy is money. It kind of centers, immediately like economy is money. For others, it's kind of a shared pot of things going in and out. For others, they think about it almost like the weather as something that's kind of, it's raining or it's sunny, but somehow kind of always on the verge of some unpredictable behavior that they don't really know where it comes from. And for others, it's simply there's a bit of a cognitive hole or a lack of interrogation of what the economy is. And despite kind of us hearing about the economy on almost a daily basis, we rarely get the opportunity to actually think about the economy as something that we built as a society and something that we can control and do something about. So I just wanted to introduce that to start to open up some cracks of what the economy is, because it's not a universally agreed upon idea. But I did want to introduce some basic foundations of what the economy can look like in a simple framework from a group called Movement Generation. And she who's running the slides, you're going to have to bear with me because this is animated. But first, you know, often the economy is kind of defined back in an academic or a traditional economic sphere of, you know, production, consumption, and distribution. A factor of, you know, production being land and capital, with little mention of people or place. In a, you know, consumer-based economy, it's not about consumption isn't about meeting people's needs necessarily, but really exists as a factor of keeping the system going and ensuring employment. But in this model of the economy that's from the group in Oakland called Movement Generation, who built this for the Climate Justice Alliance, they developed kind of a few simple pillars for thinking about the economy. It starts with the idea of resources. Resources are fundamental to any economy. Next slide, or next click. And with those resources, we apply work or our labor, and we do so, next slide, for some purpose. So this is kind of the foundation of economy, taking resources, applying our work as people for some end. But that's not the whole picture, right? We often be kind of behind the scenes. What we don't, you know, talk about is there's an underlying worldview that's really guiding this process of what we're doing with the economy. And underneath that, there's a system of governance that's really determining how we stay aligned with this economic framework. So currently, next slide, we live in what Movement Generation describes as an extractive economy, which is resources we extract, next slide, or next click, dig, burn, and dump, and that's the cycle of our current resource use. We tend to exploit workers and labor, and we do so for the purpose of the enclosure and wealth of power, and in kind of an unending cycle of needing to grow and develop new frontiers for that enclosure. So that's the description of kind of how we currently live. And it's maintained, that system, through an ideology of white supremacy, through patriarchy, through consumerism, and an overall colonial mindset. And then to govern that, to make sure we kind of stay within that framework, we have, you know, a system of militarism or the use of force that makes sure that we stay within that framework. And people you know, people can talk about this as in different ways around what the economy is. Do we have a capitalist economy? Do we have neoliberalism? Or what kind of economy do we live in? I think, you know, those can be useful terms, but those frameworks have come and gone over time. And what we've seen persist more are things like racism, extractivism, and militarism, which are hardly unique to any one of those isms, right? They can persist across different economic systems. Because we're so embedded in the system, often it feels like this economy is a force of nature. It's not something that we can control, but it's important to remember that we actually created the system, and because we created it, we know we can create something different. Next slide. One example of creating, you know, an economic system is the example of neoliberalism, and maybe some of you have kind of studied how the rise of neoliberalism happened, and this is from a UW professor, Lance Bennett, who spent some time kind of tracking the process of how kind of a small group of elites really spread ideas around how the economy should work, free from any constraint, through the use of think tanks, through academia, through politicians, to make sure that it would be spread through popular media and become basically, you know, without knowing it, the framework that we're all living in and feeling and touching, and it's really part of our language about the economy today. So this is just one example of ability to actually make change, not the way most of us would probably want to see the change go, but an important consideration of this is a socially constructed idea. So next slide, and you can click through this, Shiho, but what can we do then to imagine something different? Like if we take for granted this simple framework for the economy, what does it look to take resources, apply work, and for some actual purpose that we are all on board with? What needs to change about our worldview and our system of governance to actually lead to an economy that has the outcomes we're looking for? And next slide. In the movement generation framework, and some of you have seen this before, so it's a review, but for some it may be new, we need to start with a purpose. We cannot go on without having a clear direction of what we're for. And so that's a critical part. But it also takes intention in each sector of these pillars. So if you kind of click through here, see how we need resources to operate in a more regenerative way. We need to tap our intrinsic ability to cooperate as human beings in terms of how we want to apply our label to those resources. We need a participatory democracy to be able to, move past militarism and violence as a source of governance. And we need to actually care for one another and hold some things sacred. What's not illustrated here, but as part of the larger framework, is that this process cannot be neutral. It has to be guided by a vision of justice. So it needs the application of values in achieving this process. We know that because of the legacies of institutional racism and colonialism, this vision is further a reach from some communities, particularly Indigenous, Black, Brown, immigrant, disabled, and others, than for other communities. So we need to be working towards this vision with values filter of racial and social equity. We need to be thinking about how we shift control of the economy to communities, how we can work through this through democratization of wealth and work, through the advancement of ecological restoration, through the localization of more of our production and consumption, and also the importance of culture and retaining and restoring culture as a key element of our economy, which is often passed over. I'll give you just one more look at kind of a vision of what the economy should look like. This is from Kate Rayworth from the UK, and which just describes how that economy needs to both create a social foundation, a universal social foundation, as well as acknowledge real ecological limits, and do that in a way that really focuses on the communities that really are not part of that foundation at the moment, who are falling short of basic universal human rights, as well as the communities that are on the front lines of our current ecological overshoot and are facing the impacts of climate change, of environmental degradation, who are on the front lines of those impacts. So one more kind of base framework slide for you is this other graphic from Movement Generation, used with their permission, which is what do we do about it? And I appreciate this image because it shows how we need to be acting on all fronts. We must continuously shift the paradigm from false hopes to what we really need. And we do this by not creating alternatives, but imperatives of the economic models we know we need to survive, even when those economic models may not be politically or economically realistic in our current markets. We need to be creating what we really need. Within kind of the sphere of what is politically realistic, we need to be making laws and passing policies that realize that vision of what we need. And at the same time, we need to call out those false hopes. We need to be opposing those false hopes that are within the realm of political possibility right now. And we need to be exposing those false hopes, and you can click through, thanks, Shiho, that are maybe not politically realistic, but are real threats on the radar. And ultimately, we need to be moving and governing and building to change that movement in the direction of what we really need. And all of these things that are happening at once right now, and also we can see those things happening within the current culture and politics. And so we need to be vigilant. Next slide. And I just wanted to show that, this work is happening in many different places, sometimes under many different names. This is kind of a backdrop of the Global Wellbeing Alliance. This is a roll-up of many different groups working on kind of a new economy. And then a slide from Boston Ujima project. Sherry mentioned we had Aaron Tanaka here in the fall, which is just one model for how they're working to build a more community-based regenerative economy in that city, focused on kind of building a solidarity model where communities have more control over capital to invest in local needs. They're building businesses owned by the workers in the community and leveraging anchor institutions in a process of self-governance to try to really build that economy they really need. Next slide, please. So a lot of that was really kind of context to get to thinking about what is this project about and why a new economy. And again, this is a framework for acting collectively. And it really started just with the simple question of what would it take to build a long-term systemic shift in our economy. Next slide. And we attempted to answer that. The organizations you see listed here, responding to an opportunity put forward by the Progress Alliance of Washington through a series of listening sessions, by building an advisory committee and having conversations with our communities about what are the key kind of conditions that would be necessary for a successful focus on this long-term systemic shift. And next slide, please. Some of the things we found through that process was we need to be really principled in our approach and not lose sight of kind of three main things. One is equity, obviously, in terms of we're reducing barriers and building power, particularly for those communities that have been historically marginalized from opportunities to have a say in the economy. We need to be focused on transformative change. That element of worldview is so fundamental to our economy, and often we're kind of working at the level of that resources and changing the rules about how work and the economy works. But if we lose sight of the worldview, we won't see as much progress. So always working towards the transformative change, and then a regenerative change, of restorative of people, place, and the planet. So those were some of the key principles identified. And then we also identified a set of kind of key conditions that would be necessary to be successful. And I won't read those all, but and they go on in more detail, but we need to actually have a strong understanding of where we've been and where our economic system has been and how systems of oppression have created the current economy. We need to be working stronger and closer together and building more alignment. And then we need to be trying, experimenting and not afraid to fail in terms of working to build that new vision and working through practice. Next slide. So at the end, we identified a set of strategies, and we built onto these terms that were, I think, originally from the Climate Justice Alliance, but we found alignment with those. And the first is we need to convene. Like, more than anything, people wanted to get together to have these conversations about what the economy should look like. We need the capacity to learn together. We need the infrastructure to actually hold together through a long-term process, which is what we know it will take. We need to be doing more community-based participatory communications to change the story. We know we can't just rest on the story we've been given. We need to create new language that actually resonates and works with the type of economy we think we need. We need to actually organize and work across movements that all have a shared bond in terms of what the economy is, how the economy is driving outcomes. We need to actually move money from that place of investment in the extractive economy towards regenerative and community determined priorities. We need to build those new models of what the economy should look like by actually practicing and experimenting, as we mentioned. And then we of course need to change the rules. Like we need our systems of governance and our policy to be reinforcing all the things above, particularly changing the rules that work so that the new models we're building will work. So next slide. There's a lot going on this already. I know I'm involved in a small chunk of it, which is more what is mentioned here, and others are doing this work in many different places. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that there's a lot that's happening. This is not new, but we hope to bring it into more kind of alignment. Some of the things that we're working on right now or have been recently is convening around what this unique moment holds with the COVID-19 crisis, the movement for Black Lives, and how it's opening up the sphere of possibility, or that window, Overton window of what's possible. We're building new bodies that can work on building the new element of creating those models at the community level, acknowledging that so much work is happening already. How do we build alignment and strengthen the work that's happening? We've talked about the Funders Collaborative. We're going to hear more about efforts to actually move money, and as well as efforts to actually support the experimentation of community-based leaders building those new economic models. So I'm going to hold on going into too much detail because other speakers are going to touch on that, and we'll circle back to it. But thank you for the opportunity